very privileged to introduce to you. I think she is an amazing woman. She's got an incredible story, a incredible testimony. And so will you please welcome Representative Kelly Chambers.
Thank you. Thanks for reading my mind on that one. Okay, little different for me being up here versus down there, but thank you, Pastor Lori, for sharing those notes from kids. One of the other hats that I wear is I'm on the board for Puget Sound Honor Flight, and when we fly our veterans to Washington, D.C., we always give them a little package of mail call, and there's notes in there from kids. And one of my favorite messages was, "Dear veteran," or "Dear vet, thank you for taking care of my cat." So one of the teachers that was collecting those letters didn't explain to the kids the difference between a veteran and a veterinarian. So if you haven't done so yet, make sure your kids know the difference before they write those thank you notes. So it's kind of fortuitous that we're at this point right now. A lot of stuff has happened this year in the legislature, and I'm so thankful to Pastor Lori, Pastor Dennis for having this forum tonight and shedding some light on what's going on in law enforcement in our community. 3 years ago when I was running for office, one of the things that you do is you make a lot of phone calls. Thousands and thousands of phone calls, literally. And I would dial and dial and dial and talk to people. "Hey, what's important to you? I'm running for office." And I called the Cummins. And I had this conversation with this guy, and I remember it. And then when I met Pastor Cummins again and started hearing some of the sermons, I said, I know that voice. I know some of these stories. Wait, he's talking about Nepal. The conversation we had when I called is he had said he had just gotten back from Nepal. It's like, oh, that's interesting. My husband goes to Nepal. We support some children's homes there. So it's interesting how that you can have that chance encounter with someone and then come back to something like this. So thank you for putting this together tonight. I know this doesn't just happen. And thank you to everyone for coming and sharing your Sunday evening here. I don't know if there's some clock I'm supposed to be watching and to wrap it up in 5 minutes. Okay. So this year, the legislature passed a couple of law enforcement reform bills, House Bill 1054 and 1310. And they were passed by the Democrat-controlled legislature. So 1054 establishes requirements for tactics and equipments used by peace officers. House Bill 1310 concerns permissible uses of force by law enforcement and corrections officers. So that's what we're talking about today. These bills were sponsored by Representative Jesse Johnson out of the 30th Legislative District, was just up the road in South King County, Federal Way. And, you know, we are going on today the 534th day of emergency rule by Governor Inslee in Washington State. So that affected our legislative session this year, and then we didn't have the typical public forum in which people would come down when we'd have committee hearings. Normally people come down and they speak and they fill those rooms, and when you're on the dais listening to policy being heard, average citizens, not just activists, come in and have their say and are able to share with their representatives their thoughts on those bills. And because we were in a virtual session, a lot of that was missing this year. And I think that really impacted these bills being moved through without a lot of public scrutiny. And, you know, we introduced a number of amendments on those bills. I would like you to know some of my other colleagues and the amendments that they introduced, because I want you to know who these people are and their heart and what they do for a career, and that they live public service. Dozens of amendments introduced to both of those bills by Representative Brad Klippert from Kennewick. He is a law enforcement officer. He's in Kennewick now, but he used to work Pierce County. And when him and I met, he asked where I grew up, and I told him the east side of Tacoma. He knew that beat and said, I know your school, your high school is on 38th and G Street, Tacoma, because he used to work that area by Lincoln High School. Representative Eric Robertson, this guy's an all-star. He represents the 31st, which is just next to us here in Puyallup in the Bonnie Lake area. Eric Robertson has really one of the most distinguished careers of any legislator that I have the honor of working with, a career in state patrol. He served 25 years ago, a couple of terms in the legislature. Then he left the legislature, went back to state patrol, retired from there, became the U.S. Marshal. He was appointed by President Bush to be the U.S. Marshal of the Western region. Representative Gina Mossbrucker, she's from the 16th Legislative District. She's the ranking member on the Public Safety Committee. So these bills, when they're introduced into the legislature, they all get assigned to a committee. And she's the highest ranking Republican on that committee. She's been there for a long time. She's a very deep commitment to public safety. Again, none of the amendments that she submitted for these bills were accepted. We also have Representative Dan Griffey. He's coming up on 30 years. I think he's at 29, firefighter, EMT. He lives and works as a first responder every day. And again, had a personal experience with being a frontline responder. Again, none of his amendments to these bills were accepted. So I think as legislators, we have the responsibility to enact laws that maintain the rule of law, maintain public safety. And unfortunately, what we're seeing as these bills are taking effect, that public safety is really being affected. My husband Jeff and I, we own a business, and a couple weeks ago we had one thing that we do every year is we do our employee appreciation picnic. And we were at the park, we have it catered by KFC, and all of our cars were parked along there right at the park. And when one of our employees goes to leave, her window had been smashed in and her purse stolen. And she's a young single mom, and she literally collapsed in a puddle on the ground sobbing. Her sense of safety was shaken. In that little bit of time that she was at the park, her purse was stolen, her bank account was wiped out. She was so terrified that she couldn't even get into her own car and drive herself home. We thought, we know a great auto glass repair place. Let's just make a referral and help her get this taken care of. But it was more than that. It was her personal sense of safety that she couldn't protect her child because her identity had been stolen. She didn't even want to ride in her car anymore. We had to drive her home and somebody else take her car home because she couldn't even get herself into it. And it's that sense of personal safety that everybody in our community wants, and that we feel an obligation as legislators to ensure that we're protecting public safety and that nobody has to be reduced to a puddle of tears because somebody out there is not respecting your personal safety, your personal property. So some of these bills have to do with tactics and tools that law enforcement use. And somebody mentioned Old Country Buffet earlier, in not so favorable a light, but if we apply the Old Country Buffet metaphor to law enforcement, you go there and there's a whole selection. You pick and choose what you want, and I think of that for law enforcement as tools that they can use to apply to different situations to protect public safety with the most options and tools possible to ensure their own safety, the safety of the public, and the safety of somebody not behaving that they may have to deal with. And when we take items away from their buffet of tools that they're able to use, that means they have fewer things to choose from, and having to use things like lethal force may become more frequent. And so there's a major concern with that. We want law enforcement officers to be able to de-escalate situations, and when we take away their tools and their ability to do that, we have a problem. So, one of the issues with the stuff that was passed this year is with regards to vehicular pursuits. And Representative Eric Robertson and I had a conversation when we were offering some amendments on these bills that were not accepted. He says to me, I really don't think that they understand that this is probably one of the most dangerous pieces of this particular legislation is not being able to pursue vehicles. And we have seen, just in the couple of weeks since these laws have taken into effect, numerous stories that have hit the news, car driving the wrong way on the freeway, gentleman that stole a bus, couldn't be pursued. These laws are prohibiting law enforcement from being able to pursue vehicles in a number of situations in which you and I would want that vehicle taken off the road. A few years ago, I was driving to work from Puyallup to the north end of Tacoma. I drove on 705 through downtown Tacoma, and I come first thing in the morning, head on with somebody driving the wrong way in the freeway. And I swerved over, but as this person passed me, I see that they were an elderly person. And my day job, my other job, is working in long-term care, so I'm very familiar with dementia and caring for people that probably need to have their car keys taken away. And thought, time to pull Dad's keys. But just a practical thing like this. This is not somebody under the influence, not a criminal, somebody with dementia that's out driving, posing a risk to everyone. They may not even recognize lights and sirens behind them that it's time to pull over, because they're just not in the same reality as the rest of us when somebody has dementia. So there's a number of practical, everyday things in which law enforcement's ability has been limited by some of this new legislation. The statistics aren't going so well right now. 2020, statewide, we've seen increase of murders and violent crimes, up overall statewide. We have a 46% increase in murderers in 2020 over 2019. Even worse for Tacoma, 84% increase in Tacoma. Tacoma just hit, unfortunately, a new record. It topped murders in 2020, surpassing what they were at its previous highest, which was 1994. Did I say 1994? Okay. I'm familiar with that because I grew up in Tacoma and I graduated from high school in 1994. And I hate to think that all these years, 25 years of progress and making Tacoma a safer place is dissolving right before our eyes. 1994, my experience in middle school and high school was very much exposed to gang activity, and in high school we're having funerals at our high school for kids that were shot and killed over the weekend with gang activity. I went to high school with students that are still incarcerated for being the perpetrators of some of those crimes. And that, my friends, is not a place where we want to go back to, and that's exactly where we're heading. And Tacoma, unfortunately, just topped itself in that high crime rate. So you're going to hear some more from my colleagues, my Senator Chris Gildon. You're also going to hear from Representative Jim Walsh, who's going to talk about some reforms to the reforms. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.